and welcome back to the most amazing channel on the internet. I'm your host Rebecca Felgate, and today I'm talking about the top 10 scary warnings from the past. Have we always listened? Spoiler, the answer is no. Coming in at number 10, we have the prediction of World War III. A lot of mystics have predicted a third world war, including perhaps the most infamous of them all, Nostradamus. Nostradamus was a 16th century French apothecary and seer. He is best known for his book Les Prophéties. The chap is thought to have predicted the Great Fire of London, the rise of Hitler, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the moon landing, and 9/11. It is also said that he predicted both of the world wars, and, wait for it, the Third World War. The Frenchman warned that, and I quote, "The big war will start in France and all Europe will be attacked. It will be long and terrifying for everyone, and then finally there'll be peace, but only few will enjoy it." He says World War III will last 27 years. When will it start? 2018, apparently. Great. Oh, and he also warned that there'd be a horrible earthquake and a volcanic eruption this year. We'll get back to that one later. Both more tangible and practical than Nostradamus' warning, we have a well-meaning warning from ancient Japanese people that has largely been ignored. Coming into number 9, we have the tsunami stones. Some things aren't written in stone, but these ancient warnings were. Still, some people chose to ignore them, leading to thousands of deaths. Japan is amid 4 tectonic plates, making it extremely vulnerable to natural disaster. Japan has a huge coastline, and when earthquakes happen in the ocean, they generate tsunamis. Hundreds of tsunami stones dot the coast of Japan, dating back over centuries. Now, these stones warn future generations where not to build in case of disaster. One stone reads, "High dwellings are the peace and harmony of our descendants. Remember the calamity of our great tsunamis. Do not build any homes below this point." Pretty loud and clear, right? While some of Japan's historic disasters may have gone undocumented, these stones speak volumes as to the devastation they must have caused. Residents of Aniyoshi heeded their ancestors' warnings and never built below the stones. They were fine in the tsunami. Sadly, a lot of developers ignored the ancient warnings around the coast, especially during the social boom years following World War II. Thinking that seawalls and modern tech was enough to save them, many built below the stones. And don't say they didn't warn you, because none of these settlements survived the 2011 tsunami. This tsunami was totally devastating, and it is estimated that over 20,000 people died. Next up, we have a warning from the past and present that will one day very much affect our future. Coming in at number 8, we have the imminent eruption of Yellowstone. Remember what Nostradamus said? Well, think about that when we talk about Yellowstone. The Yellowstone volcano is a supervolcano waiting to blow. The information isn't anything new. Scientists have been warning people for years. Now, the last time the volcano erupted was 6,400 years ago, roughly 6,400 years after its previous explosion. Notice the pattern there? Honey is due. If and when this supervolcano blows, it will be devastating for almost the entirety of the United States and parts of Canada. The ash would fall as far as Washington, D.C. and Toronto. Salt Lake City, Denver, and Casper are total goners. Things wouldn't be looking great in Albuquerque, Kansas City, or San Francisco either. Now, the volcanic ash would be the main issue, choking people and devastating agriculture whilst polluting water supplies. While we know about the volcano, for some reason, cities keep being developed within the immediate destruction zone. The same thing actually goes for Italy. Remember Pompeii and the disaster that happened back then? Romans kept on building around Vesuvius. Nostradamus had a few terse words about that too. Coming in at number 7, we have a climate warning from 1847. George Perkins Marsh, a Vermont congressman and America's first environmentalist, predicted the horrors of climate change a long time ago. In mid-19th century language that's slightly turgid to our modern ears, Marsh basically warned that if we keep on burning fossil fuels and messing with natural environments, like with swamp draining and deforestation, we would screw over ourselves in the future. In a speech delivered to the Agricultural Society of Rutland County, Marsh acknowledged the effect human actions was having on the climate across the world. So his observations were way back in 1847, 171 years ago. Things have only accelerated over the past nearly 2 centuries, with humans burning more fuel and farming more animals and cutting down more trees than ever. Marsh, a revered scholar and writer who studied his whole life and spoke over 20 languages, was largely ignored in his lifetime. Although more and more people are awakening to the perils of climate change, his warning is still not totally heeded today. Around 15,000 scientists have agreed that we are already past the point of no return when it comes to climate change. So sad at number 6, we have the warning of a cockpit catastrophe. A lot of the warnings or predictions, as you may consider them to be, came decades or more before the disasters they could avert, but this eerie warning came just 2 months before 150 people were murdered. Dutch pilot Jan Crocheret, a captain for Emirates Airline, wrote an article for a specialist flight magazine, Pilot and Plane. Now, this article came in early 2015, 2 months before co-pilot Andreas Lubitz plunged Germanwings Flight 9525 into the French Alps. Jan wrote of the perils of the internal locking cockpit, which were installed as a safety measure following 9/11. Now, the doors are bulletproof and work so that nobody can storm a cockpit and hijack a plane ever. However, in this article, Crocheret speculated that this could be abused by a corrupt co-pilot. He wrote how you never know who you're sitting next to, you never know what they're thinking and what they're feeling. He said that he feared that one day he could go to the toilet and his co-pilot could lock him out of the cockpit. He wrote that there's little choice then but to go to the passengers and sit and wait to see what the future brings. Now, really sadly, this is exactly what happened with the Germanwings flight. Lubitz locked Captain Patrick Sonderheim out and convinced him to use the toilet. He couldn't get back in, then he crashed the plane. Coming in at number 5, we have the ice sheet collapse. 50 years ago, there was a lot going on in the world. The US and the USSR were embroiled in the Cold War. Also, there was a space race going on, keeping headlines occupied. However, in 1968, American glaciologist John Mercer was studying the ice sheet in Antarctica. He wrote a paper calling the West Antarctic ice sheet vulnerable and unstable, warning that it was melting and as a result, sea levels were rising. Ignoring this warning for decades until new studies did conclude the same thing, scientists are now scratching their heads at what they can actually do about it. The ice sheet holds enough water to raise global sea levels by 3 meters, which when you think about how much water there already is on Earth is a lot. Mercer discussed the rate at which the ice was melting, which has now more than doubled, so the ice is melting faster than ever. As we keep on burning fossil fuels and prioritizing beef production, this temperature of the world is continuing to rise. Yeah, we'd be in trouble if the West Antarctic sheet melted, but if all of the ice caps melted, well, this is what the United States would look like. There again, we have Europe, Asia, and Australia. As you can see, things aren't looking great. Now, this warning was one of the reasons the Paris Agreement of 2015 was drawn up, which commits the world to limiting warming by just 1.5 to 2 degrees. Now, unfortunately, President Trump wants to withdraw from this agreement. I don't know about you, but losing the world's most famous cities to the ocean is a pretty scary thought, especially when we've been warned about it. Coming into number 4, we have asbestos and the death of millions. So what is asbestos? It is a naturally occurring fibrous mineral that is known for its strength and resistance to fire. Sadly, as good as it seems for insulation, inhalation of its fibers causes cancer. Asbestos began being used in homes and businesses in the 20th century, becoming wildly popular. Concern about asbestos emerged in the 1930s, but a 1938 report that proved death by the product was airborne was ignored and then buried. Despite health warnings, it was continually used as insulation up until it was banned in the 1980s. Even now, 125 million people in the world are exposed to asbestos in the workplace. Now, shockingly, up until recently, the only places to fully ban the killer substance were Japan and Europe. Canada only banned it in 2018, and it is still in use in the USA. It is thought that the substance kills between 12,000 to 15,000 Americans each year, and you know what? The warnings have been there for decades. Coming into number 3, we have Europe the wasteland and America the broken. We can't do a list about scary messages from the past and not include the biggest super creep of them all, Baba Vanga. And actually, this isn't the last time you're going to hear about her, so keep listening. Baba conked it in 1996, but is still freaking people out with her scary warnings, and actually, they're starting to come true. Firstly, she predicted the breakup of the Soviet Union, the Chernobyl disaster, and the 9/11 attacks, and she predicted that the 44th president of the United States would be black. So this is what she had to say about Europe and America. Baba Baba V predicted the rise of Vladimir Putin. She predicted that a nuclear war will break out and that Europe will be the hardest hit. She said that the most people will abandon Europe and nuclear fallout will give most inhabitants skin cancer. She also predicted that by 2043 a Muslim caliphate would be established in Rome following years of war. Regarding the United States, she said that the 45th president would be the last ever prez, so things aren't looking great for Trump. She also said that he would divide the North and South and ultimately bring down the country. Thanks for that, Babs. You're always a ray of sunshine. Alright, next up we have one of the biggest historical warnings of all time. We have the at number 2. The rise of Adolf Hitler, his manipulation of the National Socialist German Worker Party, his establishment of a dictatorship in the Third Reich is one of the most historically interesting and devastating things to ever happen to humanity. The way Hitler managed to harbour social disquiet as political fuel, brainwash a nation, and enact ethnic cleansing was disgustingly artful and should serve as the biggest warning in social history that evil doesn't always arrive to you dressed as the devil, but often as a confident figure offering a better future. The rise of Adolf Hitler should have taught us to pay very close attention when a human both charms, cheats, and bullies their way to the top, manipulates the media, and singles out a race or religion for persecution. Did we learn our lessons from Hitler's Anschluss of Austria? If so, shouldn't Vladimir Putin's annexation of Crimea be a red light? Should China's one-party state worry us? Should we worry about Trump inviting only preferred news publications to his press conferences? Should we be worried about asking to present our social media passwords to custom officials? And should we be worried about Kim Jong-un? It isn't necessarily the Nazi years that should be the warning to us, it is the years of discontent leading up to the Third Reich that are a particular concern here. A 1997 BBC documentary film series called The Nazis, A Warning from History was released, and honestly, it is such a good watch. Nazis and World War II destroyed a lot, but imagine what a modern day Hitler could do with nuclear weapons. Warning! Warning. Okay, we of course need to end this list with some classic Baba Vags and her warnings that, you know, she's got for the future and the end of the Earth and the universe. That's right, coming into number 1, the end of the Earth will come in 2341. Mate, according to Babs, it is literally all to come. From 2033 to 45, the polar ice caps are gonna melt, but then cloning's gonna happen and disease will be cured. But don't celebrate too soon because the US will fight the Muslims in Rome using freezeways. Actually, that sounds pretty cool. In 2256, Mars will demand independence, and something terrible will be found in the galaxy as we search for further alien life. We will master time travel in 2304, but sadly a series of man-made disasters will destroy the Earth once and for all in 2341. Vanga warns that humanity will escape to another solar system, but resources will be scarce, which will lead to more war. She then predicts another dark age in 3815, which ends in 3878, and really, it's all just numbers now. By the year 4674, humans and aliens will have started breeding with a universal population of 340 billion. Sadly though, the universe party is all over in the year 5079, or so she warns. Bit of a buzzkill, isn't she? Dinosaurs walked the Earth for 165 million years, but humans have what, 23,000 years on Earth, then 2,000 more in space, and then it's all over. Can these warnings and predictions be changed if we play nice? That's the question on everyone's lips. Coming in at number 10, we have the apocalypse. The end of the world has been predicted so many times in history, and it's hard to take those warnings seriously, so many times. Nonetheless, right now, some Christian conspiracists are predicting that the end of days is coming in 2021. The Bible does actually talk about the end of days, and that book dates back thousands of years. The World Bible Society also says that Jesus will return after the end of days in 2028. Apparently this comes from studying the Bible and pinpointing a date for the rapture. Society President Dr. B. Shaw said that 7 major signs have already been fulfilled, 5 major signs are currently being fulfilled, and 15 more major signs are yet to be fulfilled. I don't know, I'm not sold on this one. Coming in at number 9, we have a warning from the Egyptian tombs. The Curse of the Pharaohs. Classic. The curse of King Tutankhamun's tomb warned people off disturbing it for thousands of years. King Tutankhamun died in 1400 1300 BC and was buried in a chamber in Thebes in Egypt. When his body was buried, the ancient Egyptians wrote a warning, as they did on many other burial chambers. Fast forward around 2,500 years and Lord Carnarvon and Howard Carter's team ignored the warnings and entered King Tut's tomb in February 1923. This is really when the trouble began to start. It seems the curse was very much unleashed despite thousands of years of dormancy. 9 people directly related to the excavation and tomb opening died shortly after the burial chamber was breached. This included the financial backer of the excavation, Lord Carnarvon, and 2 of his relatives. Similar cases of plagues and pestilence followed after opening other Egyptian burial chambers. I guess don't say they didn't warn you, because they did. I'm honestly not too sure if I believe in the curse or not, but I have to say it certainly is a worrying coincidence. Okay, this however I do believe in. We have the Mayan ruins and their stark warning against deforestation at number 8. The Mayan civilization was one of the earliest intelligent empires and certainly rivaled the ancient Greeks, Egyptians, and Romans. Between 2000 BC and 250 AD, the Mayans thrived. They had complex societies with farming, elaborate architecture, writing methods, artwork, and infrastructure. The problem was that the Mayans grew haphazardly, and all of a sudden, their booming population of 19 million started to decline and then almost entirely died out. Why? What was left of the Mayans soon ran into the invading Spanish colonists, and by this point, they didn't have the manpower to stave them off. The lasting Mayan structures, for example the Chichen Itza in Mexico, serve as a sad warning that civilizations can and will die out. So, once again, what happened? There is a lot of evidence to suggest that deforestation and subsequent local climate and drought killed them all off. The Mayans chopped and burned wood at an alarming rate. It seems it took the burning of 20 trees to create just 1 single square meter of city space. Because cleared land absorbs less solar radiation, less water evaporates from its surface, making clouds and rainfall more scarce. So basically, deforestation added to what was already a time of drought. The lack of forest cover also contributed to erosion and soil depletion, which made farming and harvesting even harder. The Mayans were around longer than we as modern nations have been, and I have to say, warning, modern humans, warning. If we don't learn from their mistake, perhaps we will have even more elaborate ruins than they did. Deforestation is going to be a problem. Coming in at number 7, we have the dodo extinction. The last dodo died 350 years ago. Long before then, and long after, species have died out, but somehow the dodo has become the poster boy for mass extinction. When the Dutch invaded the island of Mauritius, the bird had been plentiful, but it went extinct within 100 years. Why? Well, the Dutch may have hunted and eaten them, but more likely, ship rats and other animals brought over to the island by the ship ate the dodo eggs and outcompeted the birds for food. Sadly, by the 1660s, the dodos were lost forever. Yes, once again, extinctions do happen naturally over time, but this one was on us. This wasn't the first time human interference of a habitat led to the extinctions. It certainly wasn't going to be the last. It was a warning and we didn't listen, or if we did listen, we didn't care. In the past 500 years, we have been directly responsible for the total extinction of thousands upon thousands of species and the critical endangerment of thousands more. Why does it matter, some of you may say? Well, even if you're totally devoid of compassion, species balance out natural ecosystems, and without them, they can collapse. Have you ever heard the answer to the question, what would happen if all the bees died out, for example? If you haven't, I don't know, maybe you want to give it a listen. Coming in at number 6, we have Glacier 511. The world's deadliest avalanche could have been avoided had the Peruvian authorities listened to American scientists David Baynes and Charles Sawyer. These guys noticed that a glacier in the area, Glacier 511, was extremely unstable. When they told authorities in 1962, they were simply thrown in jail. Despite warning the Peruvian government that a glacier would soon cause a deadly avalanche, nobody listened. Just 8 years later, the avalanche came and buried 25,000 people under ice. In total, there were 70,000 casualties. Coming into number 5, we have the warning of antibiotic resistance. Alexander Fleming was given a Nobel Peace Prize for his work utilizing penicillin to create antibiotics and cure serious bacterial bacterial illnesses. When accepting his prize in 1945, he warned us of a future where frequent and improper use of antibiotics could lead to superbugs. That warning has been echoed by medics across time, who warn that by not taking the right dosages of medicines, we can allow our bodies to become resistant to the drug. Then, it is possible for us to spread this resistant sickness to others, which is how a very, very dangerous pandemic could start, and we wouldn't then be able to cure it. If a post-antibiotic era does come, some estimate by 2050 it could kill more people than cancer. Coming in at number 4, we have the stark warning by Koji Minoura about Fukushima. Fukushima is described as the worst nuclear disaster in the world. I actually recently watched an episode of Dark Tourism with David Farrier, who I might, side note, be a little bit in love with, and he was on a nuclear tour and registered some insane off-the-charts radiation levels, even in the areas of Japan that the Japanese government have deemed safe. What is going on? So the Fukushima disaster happened in 2011 as a result of the tsunami and the Tohoku earthquake. It was entirely preventable if people would listen to not one, but 2 scary warnings. Koji Minoura had read an ancient poem that described an earthquake in the northeast of Japan. On investigating, he found that in the year 869 AD, an earthquake had erupted in the area of Fukushima. This earthquake erupted every 1,000 years or so, meaning that actually we were overdue, and those who built the nuclear plant must have known that, or they absolutely should have done. He warned people, they ignored him. He spent 20 years trying to warn as many people as possible, publishing his works in magazines. Again, his warnings fell on deaf ears. He and the ancient poem were proven correct in 2011, and now parts of Japan are in utter ruin or totally contaminated. Coming into number 3, we have The Simpsons. We've done a whole top 10 list of the ways The Simpsons predicted the future, so I definitely encourage you guys to watch that. Either way, The Simpsons writer Matt Groening has been predicting the future for years. The Simpsons warned us about Siegfried and Roy's tiger attack 10 years in advance. We were warned about faulty voting machines, the NSA spying scandal, the Ebola outbreak, and they even predicted Donald Trump would be president long before he considered running. Lisa says that she inherited debt from her predecessor, Donald Trump. Let's hope that the economy part isn't a warning, just unfortunate non-coincidence. Coming in at number 2, we have the Cold War false warning of 1983. Some of you watching might not know about the night of September the 26th, 1983. A lot of us weren't even alive, but our parents and their parents probably were. Many of them may not have known that their lives were very nearly over. This was the night that the world almost ended. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was in charge of the Soviet Union's nuclear missile early warning system and the retaliation. In this early autumn evening, the bright red warning lights in his secret control station flashed. They were flashing to warn of an incoming missile from the United States. In the Cold War, the USA and the Soviet Union had a policy of mutually assured destruction. Now, Petrov kept his cool, unsure if the warning lights were a false alarm, as he only saw what looked like 5 missiles incoming. He had the sense to suspect that if Americans were going to strike unannounced, they would probably do so with more than 5 missiles. Rather than pressing his missile release button to fire back at the USA, he simply waited. A dangerous game, sure, but within 15 minutes he realized that this was indeed a false alarm. So many people in charge would have been hot-headed and fired back without any hesitation. Had the USSR struck America, a full-blown nuclear war would have begun that night, ending life as we know it today. Luckily, Petrov was shrewd and composed, but the incident serves as a warning not to trust computer systems over human judgment. It's also a warning that hotheads with fingers on buttons might just cost us our lives. Not naming any names. Finally, coming into number 1, we have George Orwell's 1984 warning of the surveillance state. Orwell wrote 1984 almost 70 years ago in 1949. While his famous literary work was set 35 years into his future, the totalitarian state he envisaged was a hyper-reality, a fiction imagined by exaggerating trends he saw in the modernizing world. It turns out that 70 years later, his book may be less fiction than it is a word of warning. Orwell predicted CCTV and hidden cameras, as well as government spying on private conversations, which, if we learned anything from Ed Snowden, is definitely happening. happening. He also predicted that televisions would be used to listen to civilians. Now, these days there's a lot of speculation that our smartphones might be listening to us. John McAfee, maker of antivirus systems, said, "If you give me just a small amount of information about yourself, I promise you, within 3 days I can turn on the camera in your computer at home and watch whatever you're doing." Basically, in short, 70 years ago, George Orwell warned us of the surveillance state.
Starting off at number 10, we have the Russian kindergartner. Now, this story surrounds a girl who was Russian in her past life. Her mother claims that when her daughter was learning the alphabet, she kept mixing up her letters. She would mix up her B's and V's and H's and N's. These letters aren't that similar, so it left her and her teacher confused, especially since her daughter kept saying, "I don't remember those." This little girl then states that she remembers the letter H and that it makes an N sound. Then she said that she knew more letters and began to write out the Russian alphabet. Her mom asked her where she learned that, and she said, "Vlad taught me before he disappeared," and not Vlad the vampire. This little girl claimed that Vlad was her brother in her past life. How freaky! Like, there's no way that this young girl just happened to know the Russian alphabet, unless it was from her past life. At number 9, we have the daughter who just wants to go home. This mother claims that when her daughter was young, she kept begging her mom to take her home. When she asked where her home was, she said that she used to live near the water with her other family. That was until one day she passed away. She would even draw pictures of her past home and retell memories of her watching the waves. She also refers to her mom as Pa and wants to go back home to her other Mahi. Moving on to number 8, we have The Boy and the Scottish Pub. Just like the title suggests, this story takes place in a pub in Scotland. When a 4-year-old and his family stopped at a pub in a small village in Cairngorms, the little boy recognized the pub immediately and said, "My favorite place." The boy was able to direct his dad to the bathroom in the pub, which was said to be hidden behind a wall and not even labeled. Then the little boy kept saying how much he loved this pub and sitting beside the fire. But there was no fireplace, but the boy insisted that there used to be one against a certain wall. Then he continued to talk about more details of the pub and about the owner and his friend Fred. Bar staff then said that his claims were correct. Fred was the owner there, but passed away 10 years ago. Okay, wow. Either this kid has been sneaking out and partying it up at this pub, or he truly did go there in his past life. Moving on to number 7, we have the boy who is his own grandfather. Yeah, you heard me correctly. This boy claims to be the reincarnation of his grandfather. A year before Gus Taylor was born, his grandfather had passed away. However, when the baby was 18 months, he started referring to himself as his own grandfather, Grandpa Augie. When he was 4, he could point out his grandpa in photographs despite never even seeing him before. Gus would also talk about his sister. Now, the grandfather's sister had been murdered and they always kept that from Gus, but somehow he already knew this detail and would continuously talk about his past sister. Creepy. And also super confusing. So the grandfather was the dad to Gus's mom, but his mom gave birth to her dad, the grandfather? That's so weird. Next up at number 6 we have Cameron McCauley. Now there is a short little documentary on Cameron in case you are wondering and want to check it out as well. So basically, when Cameron was 2 years old, he kept saying that he had another life on a remote island called Barra. Now, Cameron was from Glasgow, but Barra is an hour flight away, approximately 220 miles from Glasgow. For 3 years, Cameron kept talking about his family in Barra. He said he had brothers and sisters and even had a black and white sheepdog. He said he remembers living in a white house near the beach and remembers planes landing nearby. He even remembers the view outside from his house's window. Cameron began missing his family so much that he would become super upset. That's when they ended up going to Barra to find his home. When they did find his home, it had the same view that Cameron described and was apparently even home to the same dog. However, Cameron said he had a father named Shane Robertson that passed away from getting hit in a car. This is the one thing that doesn't check out. Apparently there was never a Shane Robertson that lived there, so who's Shane? Honestly, maybe it was his father from like 2 lives ago. Who even knows? We are now at our halfway mark with Shanti Devi. Shanti Devi was born in 1926 in India. When she was 4 years old, she started making claims about her real name, her other family, and her past life. Apparently, she told her parents that she lived 145 kilometers away in a place called Mathura with her husband Kedar Nath. She also said that she died after giving birth to her child. Apparently, she even had the same talking habits as someone from Mathura. Her family eventually took her to the other village and found the man she claimed to be her husband by the name of Kedar Nath. Kedar then told them that he did lose his wife 9 years ago, 10 days after delivering their son. Now, Kedar was skeptical of this girl's claims, so when he went to go meet Shanti, he pretended to just be his brother. But Shanti instantly recognized him as her husband from her past life. Next on my list at number 4, we have James Leyanger. Born in 1998, when James was 2, he claimed to be a lieutenant and passed away when his plane was shot down. Now, just like any other parent would do, they just brushed it aside, saying that he had a wild imagination. But then he kept describing accurate information. When they researched into this plane crash, they found that there was an American pilot named Lieutenant James Houston Jr. who passed away in 1945 towards the end of World War II. First off, what are the odds that he gets reincarnated and his parents literally picked the same name? Now, the boy continued to talk about his ship, the Natoma, which was also true. He would also have reoccurring nightmares about an airplane crash. His parents then met Lieutenant James's crew, who are all old by now, but they confirmed the details that James mentioned, saying that they were all accurate and only the lieutenant and the crew could have known some of the details. Coming in at number 3, we have Edward Austrian. Edward Austrian was 4 years old when he claimed that he was a soldier from World War I. He kept saying that he passed away after taking a bullet to the throat. In fact, Edward continuously would get sore throats and would say that his shot wound was hurting. Doctors couldn't even explain why he was constantly getting these sore throats, and in fact, he even developed a cyst in his throat at one point. Eventually, the cyst mysteriously went away on its own after Edward started talking more about his past life. He claims that he was a soldier named James that was 18 years old. He has vivid memories from his past life that he would share with his family. One day he said, and I quote, "We were walking along through the mud. It was damp, it was cold. My rifle is heavy. I remember looking out and seeing trees, and then there was desolation. I heard a shot come from behind. It went through someone else, hit me square in the back of the neck, and I felt my throat fill with blood." There's no way a 4-year-old could have made up those details, especially since his parents claim that they've never let him watch any soldier or war-related movies or shows. Next up at number 2, we have the boy from Thailand. Chennai was 3 years old when he started having memories of his past life. This 3-year-old boy remembers being a teacher named Bua Kai. He talked about his previous family, wife, and children. He said that he passed away after being shot in the head while walking to school. What's freaky is that this boy has 2 birthmarks on his face. One on the back of his head and one above his left eye. Those are the exact spots where the bullet entered and exited Buakai's head. Now, people believe that birthmarks tell some sort of story from our past lives. In this case, it symbolizes how he was killed in his past. Now, Buakai was a real person that passed away about 5 years before Chennai was born. Coming in at number 1, we have the boy who solved his own murder. When a boy in Syria Golan Heights was 3, he began saying that he had been murdered in his past life. The boy said that he was killed by getting an axe to his head. This boy even had a long red birthmark on his head. In this boy's case, the birthmark also showed the way that he passed away. Now, it turns out that this boy's story checked out. They took him to the village that he said he once lived in and even showed his family where his body was buried. When they unearthed his body, they found a boy's skeleton with an axe wound in the skeleton's skull. Like, there's no way that a kid could have just known where a body was buried by coincidence. But it doesn't stop there. The kid also remembered who the killer was and his full name. They then confronted him and he eventually admitted to the crime.
Coming in at number 10 now, we have the 98 Rock. At the start of World War II, Japan captured 98 American soldiers on a small Pacific island. The US struck back in an attempt to free the soldiers. Japan knew they were going to lose the battle, and so they decided to kill the 98 soldiers instead of letting them go free. One of the soldiers managed to escape and hide. In his last moments, he found a rock on the beach and carved 98 US prisoners of war and the day's date. When he was found, the Japanese admiral beheaded him personally. However, his message made sure the 98 were never forgotten by the people who found it. Next up at number 9 now, we have the message in a bottle. In 2016, a demolition crew in New Mexico found a time capsule from 1968. It was a bottle containing letters written by kids. A lot of it was normal stuff about their favorite TV shows at the time, but one message stood out as pretty creepy. It was written by a boy who said he was called Greg Lee Youngman. It read, "I am dead. I go to Montgomery School. This is the olden school name. I was born in 1900. You auto, now I dead. My favorite subject is spooking the police. I play the guitar. In case you don't know what it is a board with strings on them. I am 10 years old. See you later, savages." What did you guys make of that? Was it the ghost of a 10-year-old boy who liked to scare police, or was it just some kid being a real savage? Really weird either way. Next up at number 8, we have the Nazi time capsule. In 2016, archaeologists in Poland found a time capsule from Hitler's Third Reich. It was buried by the Nazis in 1934 before the Second World War started. They wanted it to be dug up in the distant future by people living in a utopian Nazi world. Obviously, that didn't happen, which makes the contents of the time capsule that much more chilling. Inside there were newspapers, 2 copies of Hitler's Mein Kampf, documents from Nazi Germany, and a letter to future generations. The contents were put in a Polish museum and are now a scary reminder of what could have been. Moving on to number 7 now, we have the Voynich manuscript. This is easily one of the most mysterious things in human history. It's a codex that has been carbon dated to the 15th century. It contains hundreds of pages of illustrations and diagrams of plants, people, and astronomical images, but here's the strange thing. Every page contains text written in an unknown language. It's been over 100 years now since it surfaced, and in that time, every genius codebreaker and linguistic expert in the world has tried to decipher what the words say, and they have all failed. The pictures seem to show that it's a complex analysis of life and the universe, but who wrote it? If they had a language, surely they couldn't have been the only one of their kind. What do you guys think of this mystery? Coming out at number 6 now, we have the Emerald Tablet. This is an incredible mystery because it doesn't actually exist anymore. It was said to be like the Philosopher's Stone, containing the key to turning any metal into pure gold. It was mentioned in an Arabic book around the 7th century, it was then translated into Latin in the 12th century, and even Isaac Newton himself made a copy of it. The problem is, the text from the Emerald Tablet reads more like a list of 14 riddles. Many people have tried to decode its secrets, and all have failed. Alright, moving on to the number 5 spot now, we have the Nazca lines. These huge 1,000-foot geoglyphs in southern Peru depict animals such as birds, fish, llamas, monkeys, and even humans, but only from above. They weren't properly documented until pilots spotted them in the early 1900s. The thing is though, they were made about 2,000 years ago, long before the invention of flying. Some researchers have said there was no way they could have been made unless you could see them from above. So, if they couldn't fly back then, how did they make the lines, or more importantly, who or what were they for? Coming in at number 4 now, we have the glowing rocks. Hendra Down is a collection of Neolithic age stones put together in England about 5,000 years ago. That's a couple of thousand years older than Stonehenge. In 2016, scientists made an incredible discovery. There were markings on the stone that could only be seen at night. They first realized this when the symbols appeared from a camera flash. Then they realized the stones around the area contain quartz, which glows in the dark when it's smashed together with another piece of quartz. The researchers knew that the people who built this associated darkness with the supernatural and strange pagan rituals, but that's about everything they know. Who the messages were for and what they meant remains shrouded in the mystery of time. Okay, coming in at the number 3 spot now, we have the Codex Gigas. This early 12th century book is also known as the Devil's Bible. It's almost 9 inches thick and weighs 165 pounds. It was said to have been written by a monk who had been locked up for breaking his vows. He promised that if the monastery let him live, he would write them a book that would contain all of human knowledge. Legend says he did this by selling his soul to the devil. The book contains the whole of the Bible, as well as copies of other historical texts. It contains 310 pages in total, even a drawing of the devil, but it's missing 12 pages. Some say these missing pages contain satanic texts to conjure the devil himself. Okay, next up at number 2 now, we have the photograph. In 2014, Reddit user Mariah KL13 shared with everyone a creepy bottle she found on a California beach. It looked more like a jar and was filled with bright pink water. She emptied out the strange liquid and saw a piece of paper wrapped up neatly with a black ribbon. She opened the jar and unfolded the paper. It was a washed out photograph of a woman with a bunch of needles sticking out of them. Reddit users went crazy with theories on this. Was it made by a murderer? Was it a curse? How long had it been just drifting in the ocean for? The creepy contents left more questions than answers. And finally at number 1 now, we have the text message. This one doesn't come from the distant past, but it creeped out a lot of people. In early 2017, Reddit users started sharing stories about how they were getting texts from unknown numbers. That wasn't too strange, that happens every day. What was really strange was the texts were coming from the year 2003. The numbers always seemed to start with 19. Quite often the text would just be completely blank, but sometimes they would contain random characters, such as this one that just said !S. Now the official explanation for all of this was that it was just a technical glitch. Others said it was people from the past trying to contact their future selves. I honestly have no idea. Either way, I know I would freak out if I got a text from an unknown number in the past. What about you guys? Alright, starting off the video now, I'm going to talk about Greg Wilkinson's letter. In July 2017, a strange letter was found in a bathroom wall in a house in Sydney, Australia. It was written by a man called Greg Wilkinson, and it contains some disturbing predictions about the year 2060. That wasn't the only thing though. The letter also explained who Greg was, and that he wrote the letter on the 15th of April 1995. He enclosed a picture of he and his wife on their wedding day and explained how they met. He listed the cost of everyday items there, such as bread and milk. He said that the internet was the hot new thing and that it was currently exploding. Greg even included some information on current technology. He said he was writing the letter on Microsoft Word on a laptop with 8 megabytes of RAM. Greg described that as pretty high end at the time. It does seem quite strange looking back at that, because the average smartphone these days is like hundreds of times more powerful than that. The letter begins to take a darker tone though, as Greg talks about current generational trends. He said that AIDS is killing thousands of people and that it's decimating poorer countries. Deaths due to AIDS peaked in the mid-90s in the US but have been falling ever since. This morbid tone continues though when Greg moved on to the predictions for the future. Firstly, he states that his wife thinks the letter will be discovered in the year 2020, but Greg thinks it will be closer to 2060. The letter was found in 2017, and so it seems like his wife was almost spot on. Greg went on to say that he believes there will be an ideological problem with Islam that will plunge parts of the world into what he called a global war that could go on forever. Some people said this was a chilling prediction of jihadism in the decades since the letter was written. Others have said that's wrong and that it's an unfair characterization, and the prediction has sparked a lot of debate online. Greg also accurately predicted that China would become a world economic superpower. This may seem very obvious to us now, but at the time it was still up for debate as to whether China would be able to handle its own growth. At the end of the letter, Greg apologized to those of us reading in the future if his predictions seemed quite bleak. When the story went viral on Facebook, many users were impressed with his predictions, and some even asked for the upcoming lottery numbers. Nice try. Moving on now, we have the Nazi capsule. This is one that I touched on in a previous video, but now I have the chance to go into a lot more detail here, and the details are quite disturbing. In 2016, a time capsule buried by the Nazis in 1934 was found in Poland. Archaeologists had known about the capsule's existence for a number of years, but it was buried under thick concrete. The Nazis had buried it there over 80 years before during the construction of the Ordensburg Crossen See building, which was used to train officers of the Nazi Party. It took professional miners to break through the concrete, and even then they had to wade through large amounts of groundwater that had pooled up over the years. Once it was on the surface though, the eager historians opened it up. What they found was both surprising and not really surprising in equal measure. There were a number of photographs, including some images of Adolf Hitler. There were newspapers along with 2 copies of Mein Kampf written by Hitler himself. One of the researchers described the contents of the time capsule as perfectly preserved. The construction of that camp began on April 22, 1934. It was made with huge granite foundations and cost 20 million Reichsmarks to construct. It was an important place for the Nazis. They wanted it to be an educational center to train the next generation of Nazi cadets. It had strict requirements on who could be admitted. They had to be at least 5'4", between 23 and 26 years old. They also had to be racially pure. I'm not sure what that means, but it's the Nazis, so we can guess that it would be a pretty horrific thing. They had to be in good health and have no physical limitations. Their classes would include studies of politics, world history and philosophy. They would also be taught battle tactics, military drills and sports. The camp eventually went on to become a base for the Hitler Youth. The more details you learn about the camp, the more creepy this time capsule really becomes. Moving on now, we have Einstein's letter. In 1939, Albert Einstein contributed a letter that he wrote to the World's Fair time capsule. The time capsule is intended to be open in the year 6939, exactly 5,000 years after it was buried. The time capsule was called Time Capsule 1. In 1964, when the World's Fair returned to the same site in New York, a second time capsule called Time Capsule 2 was buried just 10 feet north of the first one. Along with Einstein's letter, Time Capsule 1 contained 35 small everyday items. These included a fountain pen and an alphabet block set. There were also 75 types of fabrics, metals, plastics and seeds. A small microfilm contained literature, art and news events of the early 20th century. These came to over 10 million words and 1,000 pictures. They even included instructions on how to make a large microfilm viewer and a motion picture projector to view the newsreels on there. There were copies of Life magazine, a Kewpie doll, $1 in change and even a pack of Camel cigarettes. The seeds in glass tubes were of wheat, corn, oats, tobacco, cotton, flax, rice, soybeans, alfalfa, sugar beets, carrots and barley. Enough of all that though, let's talk about Einstein's letter. In the years since all this, the world has come to respect Einstein as perhaps one of the most intelligent people to ever walk the earth, and someone who seemed to have a great insight into the unknown. That's why people found his letter that described the brutality of war and its place in human nature as quite disturbing. It read as follows: "Our time is rich in inventive minds, the inventions of which could facilitate our lives considerably. We are crossing the seas by power and utilizing power also in order to relieve humanity from all tiring muscular work. We have learned to fly and we are able to send messages and news without any difficulty over the entire world through electric waves. However, the production and distribution of commodities is entirely unorganized, so that everybody must live in fear of being eliminated from the economic cycle, in this way suffering for the want of everything. Furthermore, people living in different countries kill each other at irregular time intervals, so that also for this reason anyone who thinks about the future must live in fear and terror. This is due to the fact that the intelligence and character of the masses are incomparably lower than the intelligence and character of the few who produce something valuable for the community. I trust that posterity will read these statements with a feeling of proud and justified superiority." Moving on now, we have Dante's time capsule. This story comes from a user on Imgur who said that one day his grandmother invited him over to her house to help her sort through some old stuff. Inside a safe in her ceramics room, he discovered a time capsule that even she didn't know was there. He found the safe while clearing out a cupboard and noticed that it had a false bottom to it. The fact that his grandma had no clue what was in there was exciting. It meant that its contents had been lost in time. They were about to discover something really big. Unfortunately though, his grandmother didn't know the combination to open the safe. After some deliberation, she gave him permission to open it by any means necessary. So they took it outside and they pried it open with a chisel. Inside the box, they quickly realized that the capsule had been put together by one of their own family members. It wasn't the grandmother's parents, but the grandmother's grandmother who had made the time capsule. That meant it was at least 4 generations old. Inside they found a message that read, "Abandon all regret, ye who enter here." Now this is a slight change exchange from the famous line in Dante's The Divine Comedy, which reads, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." They weren't sure why their relative had swapped the words regret and hope. The poem that it's quoting describes a journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven. They weren't put off by this slightly dark overtone though, and continued to search through the time capsule. They found a black silk bag with Chinese calligraphy on the outside. They translated it to find that it meant double happiness. They opened the bag, which contained an assortment of items, including a pen, a plastic box, a suede pouch, and even an oil lamp. Then they found pictures of his great-grandfather and his great-great-grandmother. Inside the suede pouch was a nice old pocket watch and a bunch of stamps from every corner of the world. The plastic box contained coins that were also from pretty much anywhere you can think of. Some of the countries don't even exist anymore. The final item that they discovered was a single solitary key. There was no note or clue as to what this key was for. It was a total mystery, but mystery was what this time capsule was all about. Perhaps one day someone will figure out what the strange warning on the paper meant and what exactly this key can unlock, but for now the answers are lost in time.